Hi, everybody. My name is Dylan, otherwise called Nirmal. I'm here to introduce myself and give a little bit of a testimony on how I got here and where I came from. So yeah, for my viewers, uh, yeah, this is a get to know me session.
Can you tell me about your childhood a bit?
Yeah, sure. Which part do you want to know?
How did you grow up? Your early years, what were they like?
Okay. I was born in Toronto in the hospital, St. Michael's Hospital. Um, my mom and dad were they had become members of a Hindu cult that just was newly forming in the late '60s before I was born. So yeah, I didn't know anything else. I was born into this Hindu sect, and I did find out later more about how it came to be. But for my early years, it was just I lived in a temple. It was like a regular, what I know now of as a family dwelling in the suburbs of Toronto. But they had converted it to a temple, so people were living in all the rooms, and even in the shed behind the building, they had people living there. I think me and my family lived in that shed, and I don't remember much about it, but I do remember my mom saying that we lived there, and I do remember very vague memories. There was a few other kids that that were raised at that place, and it was kind of our life consisted of uh, going into the temple rooms. They had these ritual rooms where they would uh, have like singing and dancing in front of these statues, and have offerings of various items to the statues, and then yeah, we had mantras or songs that we would recite about each of the. So yeah, that was at that time. I wasn't really wasn't mandatory to participate or anything. It was just with my mom. It was kind of a relaxed atmosphere. I didn't know of anything else beside that, And I there was another girl that was about my age. Her family also lived at the temple, and another girl that was a little older. They were both a little bit older than me, but about the same age. And they both were there, and we just played in the yard. And then as I grew up, when I was two, I guess my first sister was born, also at that hospital. And then by the time I'm four, I'm not sure if I was present at my second sister's birth, but she was born. And I do remember being at the hospital when one of them was born. And then suddenly, I was, well, what I remember, we went on a field trip in a camper van, and we went to Detroit. There was a temple in Detroit there. It was apparently donated by some very wealthy uh, figure from Detroit, some millionaire. And so we stayed there, and then we went down to Dallas. And then I was told they put me in an ashram. It was a church that they had converted to a dormitory for a bunch of kids, and we were living in the basement. And I didn't know at this time what was going on. It was just here. Suddenly, I'm sleeping in the middle of a gigantic hall, with high ceilings and windows right up at the top on the sides that were at ground level. So, I mean, for me, I was like 4.5. Even to get to the side of the room took a while. You know what I mean? It was so big for me. And all they had in the whole room was empty, was a set of wooden shelves. Just blank wooden shelves. And on each shelf, most of them were empty, but on the shelf, they'd have like a pile of like a rag, a couple rags, and our name with a piece of tape on it, taped under the rags. That was our spot on the shelves. That was the entirety of our possessions. So I'm there, and then my parents just said that I was being dropped off there, and that they were saying goodbye, and I didn't really have an explanation or the length of time that I was going to be there, when I was going to see them again.
You were 2?
I was 4, and suddenly I'm there with a bunch of strangers, and the rules were really strict, and the people that they had in charge of us were very mean. I had no way of knowing who they were. First of all, where they came from. It was just suddenly new people barking orders at me, and I was terrified. Let me tell you, I was terrified. And we weren't allowed to cry either. There was no crying, there was no hugging, there was no nothing. So I would just literally cry myself to sleep every night, you know, and try not to be heard. And then they would come in at 4 in the morning, and if you didn't wake up to them yelling out loud, they would just pick up the blanket and dump you on the floor.
What did your parents say to you that they were doing that for? Like, what was their explanation
Like
to
I
a
said,
4-year-old?
I don't remember any explanation given. As time went on, the explanation that I oh, my foot's getting so swollen. The explanation that I had been given was that the explanation that I had been given was that, you know, we are not these material bodies, that connections to our parents and family are not real, and the only connection that we have is to God, and we go through the guru. So we were being placed in these schools, which were called, like, they were guru schools. So they belonged. So now we weren't a possession of our parents. We were a possession of the gurus, and as possessions of the gurus, we were learning to be a detachment from our body and from this world. So austere conditions was part of it, like a hard bed, sleeping on the floor, cold showers at 4 in the morning, no affection, no attention like that. Just, for a 4-year-old, it was absolutely obscene. So when I think back on it, when I didn't know any different. They would march you, you had to stand up, your feet would be freezing, and it was stone floors, cold in Dallas, cold, cold, cold. They'd march you to the door, or you'd have to get marched to the door, get in line, wearing a piece of cloth around your waist. Just a little thin, they didn't believe in towels, so they're just a cotton piece of cloth. They were trying to reproduce what they call the sadhus, which are the beggar people in India, how they live. They were trying to reproduce that because they felt that was the ideal. So we would have to get in line and march, like in military style, out the door, down this long hallway to the bathroom. The bathroom was just a series of, you can imagine, it was the bathroom of a church basement. So it was very austere. They had, I don't know if they had modified it, but they had a series of stalls with taps, open taps, and with the lights on, with everybody watching. Each kid would go naked under the shower. The water would be on our head. We'd have cold water. We'd have to stand there for like 5-10 minutes, and they'd make us wash ourselves, and then we'd go. And then we wouldn't be able to run. We're gonna run back to the room and dry off. We'd have to walk back down the freezing cold hallway every day, and then we'd get dressed and then immediately march in lines across this stretch to another building where they had the statues on, and then for the next 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours, just singing and dancing and chanting and talking with all these rituals and mantras and stuff like that, and memorizing text and repeating text and listening to people expound on text, one person or another. Yeah, and being starving. And then by the time food came around at like, anyway, this same repetition of the way we were raised went on for, so for a while. In Dallas, I was there until what the rumor was that Dallas was being shut down because the authorities were investigating. And that wouldn't be a surprise. It was from the grandparents that had visited were saying, what kind of place is this? They called the authorities. There was some people reporting things.
And then that was from what ages to that you stayed there?
That was
And then-
until I was, well, I didn't know, I was 6 or 7, and suddenly, of all places, I'm in France. No, wait, did I get to France yet? Yeah, that's where I was. I was in France, in a school in France. It was on a like a farm in the middle of the countryside with a chateau, like a castle. And we lived in an ashram, like a small, almost like a hut, with a bunch of kids in there, and then we would march to the temple. But it was a lot different. It was a lot nicer, you know. The mood was more relaxed. The girls were not, the segregation was not quite as strict. Although you couldn't mingle, you could at least see each other and have some, you know, conversation maybe. And then I had I was a adventurous little kid, and they didn't have a lot of they would let us kind of do whatever we wanted a little bit. So one time I took this crane. They had a crane, you would crank it and it would lift this platform up in the air. And me and my best friend, one of the other kids there at the time, I cranked it up in the air, and then the weight of it, I couldn't hold it. He was sitting on the platform, and it spun out of my hand and hit me in the head and knocked me out. I got a big crack and some stitches on my head. And then I have a scar on my thumb